Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the NIMAC webinar for authorized users on the Watchlist pilot project. If you are able to hear me, please let me know. I think we did test the sound a little earlier, but I just want to make sure, and I will also put a note in the chat. Please let me know if you are not able to hear me. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to be with you guys this afternoon and to talk with you a little about a project that I'm hoping will actually make your lives a little easier and help you out a little bit. So my name's Nicole Gaines again. I'm the NIMAC manager, and today I'm going to be talking with you as authorized users. We do have the chat box. If you have a microphone, you're also welcome to ask questions. There'll be plenty of time during the presentation and after the presentation to ask any questions. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and leap in to what we're going to be discussing today. So basically what we're going to talk about is what is the watch list, a little bit about how the NIMAC gets files, types of materials that we receive, what the pilot project's about, and then we're going to do just a really brief watch list demonstration for you guys. So basically, to start out here in terms of what the watch list is, this is an optional feature in the NIMAC for authorized users. And basically, it allows you, if there's an ISBN, a title that you need that's not yet available in the NIMAC, but you anticipate that we will receive it, you can add that to your watch list, and the system will automatically send you an email when that file is available. So basically, it's just a way of, when we get the file, when it's ready, then you can actually get notified, and you don't have to be going in and checking, every other day, hey, is that file that I really need for my kid, is that in there yet? The system will let you know. So in terms of what the watch list does, I mean, it's actually a very simple feature, and it's only a notification mechanism. So it's not any communication mechanism with the publisher, and it's not a mechanism to require NIMAS from the publisher. It doesn't actually initiate any communication in the system with the publisher. However, with the new system that we released last year, the NIMAC staff can reach out to the publishers on behalf of users who need these items. I'll talk with you a little more about the details of that in a little bit. So before we kind of talk a little bit more about this, I like to give folks a little bit of a refresher in terms of how the NIMAC gets files. It's important to be reminded that under IDEA 2004, which is the legislation that created NIMAS, the only mechanism to require files is to include NIMAS language in the print book adoption contract or purchase agreement. And this is important because, the NIMAC, we're always really happy to try and facilitate getting files when they're needed, expediting files, but the publisher is actually only required to provide files if that if that language is included in the contract. NIMAC itself actually doesn't have any authority to require NIMAS for any books. So we just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. You always want to ask for NIMAS in your contracts. And this I just have included in here. I don't even expect you to read it, but it's just to give you an example. If you have any concerns that your district, that your state, that somewhere along the line, if you're finding that materials are not being provided to the NIMAC that you feel like we should have, one possibility is that the language just isn't being included. And I just want you, and that's kind of a separate issue that we're not going to delve into detail about, but if you have concerns about this, sample language is available. This is actually from the National AIMS Center website, and so it's just kind of in terms of that implementation, it should be a fairly straightforward thing in terms of insert this little chunk of text into your contracts and you should be covered. So if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to talk with you more offline about that. But this is just to give you an example of here's how you ask for NIMAS when you purchase your print books. So the next question is, was the book that I need required in NIMAS at the point of adoption, since that's the mechanism? And, part of what we contend with, and you've probably contended with in the past if you work directly with getting accessible formats made, is, if you're not directly involved in textbook ordering with your state or district, there's a good chance that you may not know if NIMAS language was included. So that's just the reality. And in terms of the NIMAC, we have also, we have no involvement in the procurement processes of any state or district. We don't receive that information from publishers or from customers. We basically receive the files in accordance with those agreements, but we don't actually receive those agreements. So we ourselves don't have any way of knowing, should this book be in the NIMAC or not. So basically, the long and short of it is, since we don't know, and since there's a good chance that you would not know either, we would rather follow up if you need a title that we haven't received. And so that's what we want to do. So in terms of the materials that the NIMAC receives, and just a quick note, if you do have a microphone, if you could put yourself on mute when you aren't actually talking. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise, so if you could just mute yourself, that would be great. Thank you. So in terms of the materials that we receive, and this is kind of another tricky part, IDEA 2004 actually has a fairly detailed definition that it provides in terms of the materials that we receive. And basically what they say is that we can receive files for textbooks and related printed core materials published primarily for use in primary and secondary education and required for use by students in the classroom. So there are several pieces to that definition. Published primarily for use in K through 12 and required for use. Those both refer to, it's going to be core instructional materials, and it's going to be required through that purchase agreement or adoption contract. So we currently work with over 140 publishers, and we have over 49,000 files now. But the reality is not all materials used in K through 12 meet that definition in IDEA and are not things that publishers are required to send us, So in terms of the materials that we do receive, we receive K through 12 printed textbooks. We receive a lot of student workbooks. We do receive supplementary readers that are published as reading curricula by K through 12 publishers. And we do receive a variety of other ancillary materials that are used directly by students. One thing that you may be aware of, or from that definition, it's textbooks and related printed core materials. And way back in the early days of the NIMAC, there was a lot of conversation and about what does core actually mean. And I like to just make it clear that the NIMAC does not impose a definition of core. As long as material meets the definition, if it's print instructional materials that's used by kids in K through 12, we're happy to accept it. As long as it's not material that's in an exempt category, which we'll talk about in a second. We do not impose that definition. So it there is a little bit of kind of a negotiation sometimes in terms of between the customer and between the publisher. And like I say, that's not something we're directly involved in. But as far as we're concerned, if you can work it out with the publisher and they can send us NIMAS for K through 12 print instructional materials, we're happy to have it. So in terms of the material that is NIMAS exempt, there are some categories of materials that publishers are not required to submit. And one of those is teacher's editions. Lots of times if folks come to us and they're like, I looked for this textbook, it's not in the system, sometimes we'll help them out with that and we'll say, oh, well, it looks like the ISBN that you have is actually for the teacher's edition. So it's important to note that the teacher's edition is going to have a different ISBN than the student edition, and you always want to look for the student edition because we don't receive the teacher's editions. College textbooks, that's another one. If the book that you're looking for is published primarily for use in higher education, we are most likely not going to be able to get a file for you for that material. Now the thing about it is that there's most of the publishers who publish primarily for college don't publish for the high school market. There's a little bit of overlap sometimes. The general rule of thumb is that if a publisher has a separate higher education imprint, we do not get those files. So if you have a question about that, feel free to let us know, or if you have a question about a particular publisher. Another thing that you can always do is if you're curious as to whether a publisher has ever submitted files to us, and they are more on the higher education end, or actually for any publisher, you can do a publisher filter search in the system and just look if they're there on the pick list. And if they're not there on the pick list, at this point, it's a pretty good indication that they probably don't provide files. Trade books are another one. If you've got books that are, the New York Times bestseller list, that kind of thing, we do not receive those files. Now, the upside of that is that oftentimes publishers make audio versions or Kindle versions or large print versions available through the trade market for those books, but we generally, those are exempt. Pre-NIMAS titles, this basically refers to the effective date of NIMAS itself. NIMAS was not retroactive, so basically when IDEA went into effect, Congress basically said, okay, as of July 2006, for new adoptions, you can start asking for NIMAS. So in practical terms, what that meant for a lot of states is that there was a little bit of lead time necessary to get the NIMAS into contract language and so forth. If you're using materials now in your school that are 10 years old or older and we haven't received NIMAS for it, it's very likely that that they're now out of print, and it's not very likely that we will be able to get NIMAS for materials that are that old. But if it's before 2007, we can almost guarantee that, that you probably adopted that before that NIMAS went into effect, and it would be a pre-NIMAS title. So the good news again about those, however, is that if you've got a textbook that was published 10 years ago or more, there's a really good chance that somebody's produced an accessible, various accessible versions of that already. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The other exempt category that I want to just mention is online and digital only materials. Just as a little bit of an update on that, we are actually waiting now for information from OSEP, the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education, because they are looking into whether or not it might be possible for states and districts to require NIMAS for born digital materials. They're revisiting what the language in IDEA actually permits us to do, and whether or not there's any wiggle room with that. So we're kind of holding our breath a little bit to see what happens with that, and we'll certainly make a big announcement if it turns out that this is something that is possible for you guys. But currently, the understanding that we've had from the department from previous guidance is that those digital-only materials cannot be submitted to the NIMAC. Standardized and achievement tests, those kinds of things we don't get. And also there are a lot of test prep materials that trade publishers produce that kids will use in schools. Workbooks, getting ready for the SAT, getting ready for that kind of thing. And if it's a trade publisher, we're not going to get those materials. So again, K through 12 instructional materials, textbooks, workbooks, readers that are a part of a reading curriculum, that's generally the stuff that we're going to get. So after all this, there are some cases where it's going to be easy to tell that material is outside scope for NIMAS. If somebody hands you a textbook, you open it up and it's like copyright 2002. Yeah, that's just not going to happen. Or somebody hands you a book and it's, the red badge of courage. We're not going to get NIMAS for that. But in other cases, you may not always know. So if you're not sure whether we're going to get it or not, you can add that ISB into your watch list. We can research the title for you and find out, whether or not it's possible to get the NIMAS for that. So in terms of what the watch list is, again, it's a real simple mechanism. It was designed originally just as a really simple mechanism for you to be able to add the ISBN for something that you expect, and again, originally the idea is you've got a new adoption, you're going to get the NIMAS for it. You really need the grade 4 book first because there's a kid who needs Braille, for example. You can put that on your watch list and make sure that you get notified as soon as that's available. So the main difference now and why we're able to kind of do this research now is that back before the new system that we released last spring, we didn't actually know what ISBNs folks had on their watch list. But now we can actually go in, we can do a report and get a list of those ISBNs, and we can look into them and follow up. So it gives us a new opportunity to research the titles and also to expedite them and put them at the top of our processing queue once they're received. So what we're wanting to offer in terms of this project is that if the ISBN is within scope for NIMAS, we can request the publisher expedite the file if it's already in production. And just to kind of give you a little more information about that, NIMAS is not a format that is produced as a part of print book publication. So it's actually a separate step. And so the way that this generally works is that a publisher will go through their editorial process. They'll kind of have their A printing, and then they'll have a corrected printing. And then once they've got the textbook ready, the classroom ready version of the textbook, then they will take those, InDesign files or PDF files, send those to a third-party conversion vendor who specializes in digital conversion processes. They will produce the NIMAS, and then they will send us the files. So there's a little bit of there's a lag time there from between when the print book is ready and when the NIMAS is prepared. So again, so what we can sometimes do is, especially for new adoptions or new publications, if there's a specific title that you need from a new program or 2 or 3, then we can say, hey, we know for sure there's an immediate need for these. Can you put these at the top of the queue? Can you get these expedited? The other thing that we can do is that if the NIMAS is not already in production, we can, inquire with the publisher, is it possible to get NIMAS for this? And again, in order to require NIMAS, you have to ask for it at the point of adoption. But we've actually found that some publishers will provide NIMAS upon request. If it could have been requested, in other words, it's core K through 12 material, and it was published, after the NIMAS effective date, and it's still in print. And the still in print is kind of a big one, because as I was mentioning a few moments ago, it's like, even if you have something that could have been requested way back in 2007, a lot of times with publishers, they have a pretty consistent cycle in terms of superseding editions with new editions. And so if you've got a book that's, hey, it was superseded by 3 subsequent editions and it hasn't been in print for 5 years, that's kind of the other thing that comes into play. But if they can provide it, we've had really good luck with being able to obtain it. Now, another issue here, I kind of talked a little bit about this in terms of the way it works, in terms of the print book gets produced, then you get the NIMAS. One of the things that is important to note is that if the publisher will produce the NIMAS, the turnaround time can vary a lot. Sometimes we can get it really quickly, maybe sometimes even within a week, and other times it may be several weeks. So from our standpoint, we'd rather try to obtain a file than have the need go unmet. And then there's also the other rationale that if a kid needed it this time, even if it's going to take a while, there's likely to be another kid down the road who may also need it at some point. So if we can get the file, then in the long run, that's better. In cases where the title is NIMAS exempt, one thing that we might be able to do is provide information on accessible formats that are available from other sources. We always recommend the Louis Plus search. And if you're not familiar with that and want more information, ping me offline and I'd be happy to tell you more. I've included the link here, but this is basically it's a unified search that's made available through the American Printing House for the Blind, and it includes information about accessible formats that are available from over 140 different organizations across the U.S. And the search results also include Learning Ally and Bookshare and the NIMAC too. So it's just a really good single-stop shopping kind of option there if you're looking for accessible formats. We also sometimes can help you in terms of providing a link for higher education publishers or other help directly from the publisher if we're not able to help. And then in some cases as well, we can sometimes help you locate a classroom compatible alternative that is available. So this is what we're trying to do. The long and short of it, we want to help you get the files you need. And if you need a title that you're not finding, please add the file to add the ISBN to your watch list, and we'll research the title for you and let you know if we can get it. A few watch list pointers. I'm going to actually go in and we'll take a quick look at the watch list in a moment, but you want to be sure again that you use the textbook, the ISBN for the textbook for the student edition. Sometimes that textbook only ISBN can be really tricky. I actually had a case just yesterday where we were looking for an ISBN for someone, and we found that the ISBN that they had was the textbook plus a 6-year subscription to online resources. Well, when we actually get the printed textbook, the publisher only provides us the ISBN that's actually printed on the book. So there are a number of marketing ISBNs that publishers may use depending on how they've bundled that textbook with other resources or products. So to the extent that you can, try to zero in, and if you have access to the print book, be sure that you're using just the textbook ISBN and not a package ISBN or bundle ISBN. So, and again, we can often obtain the NIMAS for K through 12 publishers, for K through 12 textbooks published after, published after 2007 if they're still in print. Again, trade books, pre-NIMAS titles, textbooks published primarily for use in college courses, not so much. Another watch list pointer, we have had just a couple of issues over the years in terms of folks not quite understanding what the watch list is for. We just want to let you know in order for this to really be a helpful project, to use it kind of with discretion for the items that you really do have an immediate need for, and don't try to use it to track an entire adoption. It's really not intended to be used in that way. If you do need help in terms of if you're searching to find out what's been submitted for an adoption, there are a lot of different copyright, state edition, publisher filters that you can use when you're searching in the system to locate that kind of information, and we'd be happy to help you with that if you need to. But you just don't want to add hundreds of ISBNs to the watch list because that will be counterproductive. At the same time, we've also had issues just once or twice over the years with folks not understanding that you don't really want to use the watch list to try and make blanket NIMAS requests for older titles in your textbook inventory. If you've got like an IRC and you've got like an instructional resource center and you've got hundreds of books and some of them are out of print and some of them are trade or whatever, you don't want to just add all those to your watch list because we won't be able to, for one thing, we won't be able to deal with it, but for another, if there are exempt materials, we're not going to be able to get those. And again, we really want to have this focus on there's a kid that we know that needs this, and we want to try to get it for that kid, not as a matter of trying to, you know, give the publisher a shove in terms of an entire adoption of 200 titles or what have you. So anyway, so I think that's enough talking from me for a moment. Are there any questions about what I've covered so far before we kind of take a quick look and do a demo? Anybody have any questions? Okay, well, I'm not hearing any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of show you real quickly how to use the watch list, and I'm going to log in to our test authorized user account. And if you've never used it before, I just want to show you, it's right up here, right after contact information and before reports, it's right here, manage watch list underneath your search box. And when you click on that, you'll see that there's a box, that's labeled ISBN, and all you have to do to add something to your watch list is, you know, put the ISBN in there. You don't want to put dashes in there. That's the only thing that you have to be careful of. And I've actually got a few sample ISBNs that I'm going to pull up over here to show you. Hold on just a second here. Okay, so, okay. So the first one I'm going to put in here, okay. So when you, actually I did that very quickly, but when you put the ISBN in the box, and a lot of times copying and pasting is going to be your better option just because you can probably avoid typographical mistakes that way. One of the things that I'll mention at this point is that if you do add a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. If you add a number in the ISBN box that's not a 10 or 13-digit ISBN, you will get a notice from the system, please enter a 10 or 13-digit ISBN. This is the only, it's very simple. The only validation that the system can do on your data is to tell you whether you entered a 10-digit or 13-digit ISBN. It's not actually going to know if the number that you entered is correct or it really corresponds to a book. So you do want to kind of just take a double check and make sure that you entered the ISBN correctly. So I'm going to scroll down here a little bit and show you a little bit more about what the chart looks like here. The one that I just entered, the date is right here, 5/8/2018. And what you're going to see is you're going to see the ISBN. If the file is in the system, you'll see the identifier for the file set, the date that you added it to the watch list, a status, and then you have under actions the option to delete. So that delete can be good if you find that you actually entered a number and it did have a mistake, but it was 10 or 13 digits, and so the system accepted it. You can always just delete it and enter it again, so it's no big deal. And I'd like to talk now just a moment about the different statuses. Now, certified by NIMAC, that means that the book was certified after you added it to the watch list. And that would also mean that you have already been notified of it. So this is kind of a it's kind of a helpful thing because when an item that you added is certified, it'll show as certified here, and you'll also get the email. So if you miss the email, you can still see in here, oh hey, yeah, it is certified, it's ready, yay. To give you an example here, if you try to add let's see, if you try to add an ISBN that has been certified, which is what I'm going to do next. Okay, it's giving me a strange. Let me try just typing that in. 978-0544-66916. Okay, this is very unusual. I am not sure why it's giving me strange messages here. Okay, I'm not sure what that strange message was. I think it might have had to do with copying and pasting from screen to screen, and it somehow confused my machine. But I refreshed the page, and it looks like it's going to be. It looks like it's going to behave now. Let's try again that ISBN that I wanted to try. Okay, so this is an example here where I entered this ISBN, and this is a case where the ISBN that I've chosen is already certified and available in the NIMAC. So it will give you this message here in the little blue text box if that is the case. So you can't accidentally add one that is certified because it'll just tell you. But I do want to talk a little bit about some of these other statuses. Not submitted to the NIMAC, that's pretty self-evident. It just means that the system does not recognize that ISBN. Awaiting corrections, that means that we have reviewed the file, but it had problems and it had to go back to the publisher, and we're waiting for them to resubmit the file. Fortunately, that tends to be a pretty small proportion of files. But that may happen occasionally. If you add something to your watch list and it has that status, we will also be alerted to that, and we will know to give the publisher, give the conversion vendor a nudge and say, hey, there's somebody who needs this right away. Can you expedite it? Same thing goes for in the review process. That means we've received the file. It's in our quality control queue, and it's being reviewed. And if you get a status of in review process, we will also automatically be pinged, and we will know to expedite that file for you. So, and again, once you, if you have no longer have the need to have the item in your watch list, you can just delete, and it will go away, and you can kind of easily keep your watch list tidy. So, again, that is basically, that's the watch list function. It's very simple. It's pretty intuitive. Again, the main thing is just that you want to be sure that you have the student edition ISBN when you add the item to your watch list. And the other thing is, if you are looking for something, if you're looking for something that's so new that it's not found anywhere online, and you don't, I don't know, it's like I'm not even sure whether to mention this because I don't want folks to feel like they need to go and actually research their stuff before they put it on the watch list. But just for example, we got a request the other day for a 2019 copyright. It was material that hasn't yet been published. And when we go to research it, we're going to be looking online either on the publisher's website or other sources to verify, hey, who's the publisher, what's the title, and so forth. So just as kind of a heads up, if it's something that is not yet in publication, you may want to give us a heads up in a different way, or if it's something that is a very small publisher that doesn't even have a website, or if I guess the long and short of it is if you can't find it online anywhere, we can't find it online anywhere, but that comes up relatively infrequently. But when that does come up, it's kind of the point is basically that if we're not able to find it online, we may give you a ping and say, hey, we'd like to research this for you. We're not able to find it anywhere. Can you clarify the title, the publisher, and the copyright year? So those are basically the only 3 pieces of information we need to follow up for you. But if we're not able to identify what it is that you're requesting, we may get back in touch and ask you for that. So So again, this is the Watchlist pilot project, and we hope that the Watchlist will be useful for you. If you have any questions, we've got plenty of time now. If anybody has any questions, please feel free. And if there are no questions, then I would just say again to thank you for being able to join us this afternoon. And if you have any questions later, if you decide, okay, hey, I've never used the Watchlist before, but I'm going to give it a whirl. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. And I will go back for our very last slide. And we can always be reached at NIMAC@aph.org or toll free at 877-526-4622. We're happy to help. So thanks again for joining us this afternoon, and have a great day. Bye-bye.